Hi everyone, thanks for joining us on what is the first of an exciting series of Snack and Learn webinars from WSP for 2023. We're going to be talking today about e-cargo bikes and sustainable urban freight and sharing with you some of the lessons learned from some trials that we've been developing over here in the UK. My name's Lawrence Penn and I work for the Future Mobility team within our transport planning business, and I'm joined by Ellie Hodges.
Hi, I'm Ellie and I'm a graduate in the transport planning team based in Bristol.
Brilliant. So a couple of housekeeping things just before we begin. You'll notice on the right-hand side that you'll be able to access a copy of the slides in the handouts section. And also, if you've got any questions throughout the duration of the presentation, feel free to stick them in the chat box and we'll do our best to get around to them at the end. So we'll get straight into the presentation then. Here we go. So a bit of an agenda for how we're going to run the session today. This session actually builds on a presentation that we delivered towards the end of last year. So we're going to start with a bit of a recap on what we covered and a bit of an intro on e-cargo bikes before moving on to how we mobilised our trials of electric cargo bikes in the UK and sharing some of the key learnings that we've developed along the way. We're going to finish with some of our next steps and a bit of a Q&A right at the end. So getting straight into it then, so for those of you that aren't familiar, electric cargo bikes are classed as electric bikes, but of course with additional cargo carrying capacity. They can go anywhere that e-bikes can go, including many places that vans cannot, so that means making use of the cycle infrastructure. This enables them to dodge congestion and achieve up to 60% increases in efficiency if you believe some of the recent studies. They're extremely capable with a range of about 30 miles, and that's on a single battery, and many carry a second battery to extend that range further. And some of the larger variants can carry up to around 100 kilograms of cargo and anything up to around 2 cubic meters of space. This makes them very worthy competitors to vans, and as we've already mentioned, they're very suited to the dense urban areas where you can really exploit that cycle network. Being electric bikes, they've also got zero tailpipe emissions, which is a huge benefit for obviously improving air quality and fighting against climate change. Being smaller, lighter, cleaner and greener, they also have a reduced impact on our places, and it enables us to shift more space, reallocate it towards active travel and placemaking functions. There's also many commercial reasons for their introduction, as they have lower running costs to their smaller size. Of course, they use electricity rather than diesel or petrol, and their insurance costs are lower, purchase costs are lower, and you can often make savings on the rider salaries as well because you don't need a driving license. They come in many different shapes and sizes. They're very often bespoke to a particular activity, and this enables them to be highly efficient at that task. I think it's important to stress at this stage though that they're not a complete solution. You might use a van for pretty much anything, but e-cargo bikes tend to be a more dedicated purpose. But as I say, this enables them to be highly effective, and in many cases they're paired with a trailer to increase their carrying capacity further. And we're seeing a huge amount of innovation in the market with more and more capable and tried and tested e-cargo bikes coming into the market all of the time. Last time then we covered some of the various, I suppose, policy angles for the implementation of e-cargo bikes. It won't be a shock to anyone that we've seen a huge growth in diesel van sales over the last 20 or 30 years or so, and the vast majority of these have been diesel, powered by diesel. So they come with all the air quality impacts and the damage to the cities. And whilst there are huge improvements in fleet electrification, this of course only solves part of the problem. Electric vans still get stuck in congestion, they still take up a huge amount of space on our roads, and it really prevents us from reallocating that space to more productive purposes, and stopping us from changing our cities to work for people and not cars or vans, because of course it's people that actually live there. There's also a number of policies being introduced, such as clean air zones, congestion charges, low traffic neighbourhoods, and these are all resulting in additional charges and more circuitous routes for businesses. It's also resulting in some locations, some problems accessing locations. And all of these extra costs, of course, are not they don't apply to e-cargo bikes who can pass straight through modal filters, don't pay congestion charges, and can still access right outside the premises. Additionally, we're also seeing that business rates and the cost of property is increasing, particularly in those larger cities. And this is driving businesses to reallocate their the retail space to more profit-making functions, so front of house. And this is resulting in less storage space, so we need more frequent and smaller deliveries, which fits very well with e-cargo bikes. So we're left with this question on how we can satisfy growth in online retail whilst reallocating space in our urban centres. And we think that e-cargo bikes play a big part in realising that future. Organisations, of course, are also starting to make their own commitments to progress towards net zero, and e-cargo bikes are a fantastic first step and a very visible step towards achieving those outcomes. So how do we accelerate growth in e-cargo bike usage then? Well, one approach, and one we think that's proving successful, is a series of trials that we are developing with the West of England Combined Authority. WECA, as we call them, are running a future transport zone, which is a £28 million programme with funding from the Department for Transport here in the UK, and it's funding a wide range of different mobility interventions, including a mobility as a service application, a network of mobility hubs, a transport data hubs, dynamic demand responsive transport, and of course our sustainable urban freight programme, a part of which are our e-cargo bike trials. And essentially what we're trying to do is create a blueprint of replicable use cases that can be tried elsewhere. So really bringing together that total cost of ownership, the commercial benefits, the environmental implications from emission savings, but also the more human side and the qualitative side. So what does it mean for drivers who become riders? What's the impact of bad weather, for example? WSP are helping out the Combined Authority by offering some of our in-house expertise and support across the future mobility and freight teams, with lots of input from our transport planning business too. And we help to facilitate engagement with some of our key stakeholders and use that expertise to ask all the intelligent questions, as well as engaging with them in soft market testing for the onboarding of new partners and new people to trial with. Furthermore, alongside, where we can, we're supporting innovation through the development of bespoke products too. For example, an e-cargo bike routing index, which looks at all the places that e-cargo bikes should be going, but potentially aren't due to infrastructure constraints. So if e-cargo bikes are so brilliant, then why aren't businesses adopting them more quickly? Well, compared to ordinary bikes and ordinary e-bikes, they're relatively expensive. And the bike on the right hand side, for example, might cost you as much as £5,000, with some of the more fully fledged e-cargo bikes, your four-wheelers, for example, costing anything up to £13,000, which makes them, I suppose, quite competitive, but can be a bad thing with vans. And if a van can sort of do everything, but your e-cargo bike is perhaps more use case specific, then you might still opt for the van. However, of course, e-cargo bikes come into their own, particularly on operational costs. However, the cost savings aren't particularly well known, not often very well communicated, and for some businesses, they may not have even heard of e-cargo bikes in the first place. So our trials are aiming to really bring all of that information together, all of those different aspects of operating a new type of vehicle, to encourage businesses to have the confidence to depart from that business as usual approach of using a van. There's also the driver and rider behavioural change piece that we spoke about, and we're learning a huge amount through the development of trials of how we can sort of combat some of these issues. Furthermore, the supporting services are less mature, so if your van breaks down, you'll know fairly well where you need to take it to get it repaired. Furthermore, insurance products are quite familiar to us, and all of those supporting services that you need to operate a vehicle are in place. This isn't necessarily true for e-cargo bikes. For example, during our trials, we've had to offer specific training, manufacturer-specific training to local bike mechanics, and find bespoke insurance products to allow the operators of these bikes to park up for 20 minutes without locking up. So all these sort of additional things that we need to consider, which have been brought out through our trials. In order to get the trialling partners set up, we've aimed to offer a complete package of services and products, so including the bikes themselves, and we select the bike in order to be bespoke to a particular use case, and this sometimes means modifications, and also providing a maintenance package. If you get stuck due to mechanical failure, you can't just stick it in the boot of your car as you might do with a regular bike. It needs a van to come out and collect it. We mentioned the bespoke insurance products, which allow you to park up for 20 minutes without locking up, as well as the personal protective equipment, your helmets, your high-vis jackets, etc., and bespoke training from e-cargo bike expert operators to ensure that people are safe on the road, and make sure we're mechanically sympathetic to the bikes. Furthermore, through our own project team, we're offering the technical support that we need to get people on the ground, and again, to give people that confidence that they need, that they can invest in this solution. So I'll now hand over to Ellie, who's going to give us a bit of detail about how the trials are going and how we've mobilised them.
Great, thanks, Lawrence. So as you can see, we've got a number of trial hosts and a range of use cases that we've been using to help trial out these e-cargo bikes. These are all campus trials, which helps allow comparison between the hosts and their areas that can easily swap out a van for an e-cargo bike because the distance being travelled are quite short and the loads that are being carried are quite small. So first of all, we've got the Bristol Royal Infirmary, which is a large hospital in the centre of Bristol. They have 2 4-wheeler EAV bikes, nicely branded, that you can see in the picture there. And they're going to be using these to transport IT equipment, PPE and clinical samples around the site. Bristol's recently implemented a clean air zone, and a lot of their current aging diesel fleet are not compliant for this. They're also having issues with driver recruitment and finding people with a valid driver's license. So the team at the BRI are hoping to overcome these issues by swapping out their vans for some of these bikes. We've also got the University of the West of England, a campus uni in Bristol, again with one of these 4-wheeler bikes. They're going to be using this for their postal round, so transporting letters and parcels to the students that live in halls on site. They currently use a van to do this, but because their campus is mostly pedestrianised, the van has to leave the site, drive all the way around and enter at a different point. So they're hoping that by using this bike instead, they'll be able to cut that journey time down quite considerably. We've also got the University of Bristol, which is split across different areas of the city. So they're going to be using 2-wheeler bikes, like the picture there, so with the cargo load at the front, to transport sporting equipment between their different campuses. Next slide, please. We've then got the Port of Bristol and Royal United Hospitals in Bath. They're both going to be using a 2-wheeler bike as a sort of mobile toolbox, so being used by their estates and facilities team to help make any repairs that are needed around the campus. And then Royal United Hospitals are also using a 2-wheeler bike for their community therapies team. So this is for their physios when they go into the community for house or school visits. They currently do those visits by car, but Bath is quite notorious for having terrible congestion. And so they're hoping that by using the bike instead, they'll be able to bypass that traffic using cycle lanes and also save time by not expensing petrol afterwards. It's also just great for the social value of the hospital through their commitment to decarbonisation and keeping their staff nice and active as well. And then we've also been looking into additional use cases that we hope to have on the ground in the spring. So we've got Unite students who own private halls across the centre of Bristol. They currently use vans to transport kettles and toasters between the different halls, but because of access restrictions in Bristol and bus priority lanes, one-way systems, it's meant that these journeys are quite long. And as you don't need a van to carry a light bulb, they're hoping to swap that out for an e-cargo bike. And then lastly, we've got the BBC, who currently use taxis to transport hard drives for post-production across the city. So they'll be using an e-cargo bike instead. Next slide, please. So back in May, during the early stages of the project, we hosted a demo day. And this was an opportunity to get together a range of e-cargo bike providers and suppliers. And it was the first time a lot of our riders had ever interacted with e-cargo bikes before. So it's a chance for them to try out a few models and talk to the suppliers to ensure that the model they were choosing was correct for the needs of their use case, and just give them a bit more confidence when riding the bikes as well. And it just provided that sort of bit of momentum that we needed to kickstart the trials too. We had some great media coverage from BBC Points West and internally through the Combined Authority as well. So overall, it was a really successful event. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we've already launched a couple of the trials. Next slide, thank you. So this picture here is from our launch day at the BRI. And once the bikes have been delivered, we're then able to provide training to the nominated riders. So this is done through Zedify, our training provider, who are sort of experts in the cargo bike field, and they're able to provide bespoke training depending on the bike and the bikeability of the rider. This is something that we've deemed is really important, as riding an e-cargo bike is quite different to your standard 2-wheeler bike due to the weight distribution and the size and the scale of them. And providing this training just helps encourage good rider behaviour and instill confidence in the riders, especially if they're going to be taking the bikes out on the road. Then we have our monitoring and evaluation strategy. So this is something that we think sets us aside from other trials and has been designed to capture every angle of what we're trying to do. So we have the sort of hard metrics that come from our GPS tracking data. So you can see that the picture at the bottom of the screen. This is our Power Unity tracker platform. So during the baselining period, we installed GPS trackers in the vans. And now for the trials that are on the ground, we've moved those trackers into the bikes. And this has helped us see if there's been any change in routing. And then from that, we can calculate any vehicle kilometre reduction and any associated carbon savings as well. We then have qualitative data that is produced through daily surveys that our nominated riders fill in for us. So this is on the right-hand side of the screen. And this allows us to see just how the riders are finding the bikes and capture any change in their day-to-day activities, and just helps provide a bit of richness to the GPS data. So for example, if there was an anomaly with the trackers, such as like a road closure or a mechanical issue, the riders would be able to notify us of that through the comment box at the bottom of the survey, and it would just help us understand why the bikes perhaps weren't operating as they should. And this has meant we've just built up a really rich data set to help report back to the Department for Transport. Next slide, please. So as well as the trackers and the surveys, we've also collected some additional baselining data from the vans. So we looked at the sort of day-to-day costs of fuel and maintenance, and then some sort of additional costs that might have been ignored in the past, such as parking fines or speeding tickets. Pretty much all of these costs on the screen are not applicable to e-cargo bikes, which just really helps to build the economic case for them. Although they are expensive to buy at the outset, their operational costs are a lot lower compared to, say, a diesel van alternative, and all this data really helps prove that. Next slide, please. We also have monthly check-ins with our trial hosts through working group meetings. So this is an opportunity for us to just catch up and see if there's been any issues with the bikes. For example, if one of the riders wasn't enjoying the trial, we'd be able to identify someone new and be able to set up training for them. Another example was at the BRI hospital, we provided QR codes for them to scan on their phones to access the daily surveys, but this wasn't really something that they were engaging with, so we swapped those out for paper copies of the form, and it meant that we got a lot more responses and a lot more data, so we're able to amend our monitoring and evaluation strategy accordingly. We also have quarterly collaboration groups, which is when we get all the trial hosts attending in the room together, and they're able to share their learnings with each other. We've deliberately trialled similar use cases across campuses, so because of that, they're likely to encounter similar problems, and from that, be able to share solutions and insights. And this cross-collaboration between the trial hosts we found to be really valuable so far. I'm just going to pass back to Lawrence to run through some key learnings.
Thanks, Ellie. So yeah, as you can see, we've got a wide range of different use cases being tested there, and some of the emerging results are really promising too. So this is some data from the baselining exercise of the Bristol Royal Infirmary, and we found that almost 3/4 of trips are less than 2.5 kilometres long, with an additional 15% less than 5 kilometres. So showing that really it is short-range trips that are largely being made, so highly suitable for e-cargo bikes. Furthermore, when we look at the average speed of the trips, 85% are less than 10 miles per hour, so about 16 kph, and once again, well within the top speed of an e-cargo bike. When we look at capacity and empty running, we also find that a large amount of trips are well within scope of e-cargo bike, so really promising data for the rest of the trials. In terms of the riders, well, they're really enjoying staying active and leading a healthy lifestyle as part of their job and being able to get out in the fresh air. E-cargo bikes are also, I think, by many accounts, very fun to ride and seen as a bit of a novelty. And we receive really positive public perceptions from people on the street who will often stop a rider and ask them what it's all about. Emerging feedback, so of course it's not all been plain sailing, and we are finding that the current e-bike legislation in the UK and EU is holding back e-cargo bikes to a degree. The bike can only offer assistance when the pedals are continuously turning. So if you encounter wheel spin on a hill, for example, the bike can't necessarily help you, and you might come to a stop if you're not carrying enough speed. Larger and larger bikes are meaning that we require more and more power, so this could become a bit of a barrier as e-cargo bikes start to proliferate. It's also weather dependent, so understandably, if you're out on a wet and windy day, you might be less inclined to get in your e-cargo bike than a van. And as we mentioned, terrain is a big factor, particularly the hill around the Bristol Royal Infirmary, although we did see vans slipping up on a rainy day as well, so we were somewhat reassured by that. To finish up, rider perceptions. I think a key part of what we're learning is all about rider behavioural change. And also on the sort of operational side and people looking after the staff, there's often a misalignment between the interests of fleet managers, riders, and occasionally the sustainability staff. Sustainability staff, it's on their job title to trial this sort of change, but if you're just looking after a particular department, you might be more worried about operational performance rather than necessarily the carbon savings. Additionally, in terms of staff management, if a rider has an HGV license, they may be kept aside to enable them to look after the larger vehicles instead of an e-cargo bike. So there's something to consider there. We've already mentioned the supporting services. They're not quite as mature as in the automotive sector. So we did have to bring all of those together, and that may be the case for a few years yet, where other people are trying to do the same. And we mentioned that trial host commitment. I think it varies massively between job titles. So really you want to be getting your hands on the sustainability staff in particular, who are really passionate about the trials and can be an internal advocate for their implementation. Our next steps then, just to wrap up, so we're going to continue to get our additional trials on the ground, and all the while encouraging our trial hosts to find additional use cases to maximise the utilisation of the e-cargo bike, and bring on our new trial hosts to do the same. Our comprehensive monitoring and evaluation strategy is getting the data flowing in, and we're analysing it as we speak, and we can't wait to share the results of it with you in the future. And Sarah, our client, and I will be doing a couple of conferences this summer in the UK to hopefully share what we've been learning. But that is about everything from us. So thank you very much for listening. We really hope you found it interesting, and yeah, we'd be more than happy to answer some of your questions.
Thank you, Lawrence and Ellie, for a fantastic presentation. Really happy this presentation was kicking off the 2023 Snacking on Webinar series. So just some housekeeping items before we get going. The presentation slides are available to download in the handout box. And also for any questions, please log your questions in the question box on the control panel. So I will start with the first question. Just if you can open your webcam, it will be really nice to see you both.
Hello.
Perfect, thanks. From experience, what is the key to successfully maintaining a fleet of cargo bikes?
So I think it's about having a mixed fleet. So as I mentioned, e-cargo bikes are not a complete solution. They are best suited to those urban environments and particular use cases. So I think where you've got a van to be able to fall back on, ideally electric, that ensures operational continuity and protects the sort of the commercial interests of the company and potentially the sort of reputational ones too. But I think another key point is having strong advocates, particularly amongst your rider team, people that will really put the effort in to give them a go and to give them a fair chance of succeeding, because it is new, it's going to change operational practices, and there'll be a lot to learn along the way. I'm sure not just in our trials, but when people do it elsewhere too. So yeah, I think internal advocacy is really important.
Thank you. The next question is, how can e-cargo bikes be supported on a local level via highway infrastructure, for example, signs, lines, and legislative tools?
Sure. So we were really encouraged to see that here in the UK, the new design guidance makes accommodations for much wider vehicles. So I think, width of infrastructure is a key one. Not putting motorbike barriers in to prevent access to really good quality stretches of cycle infrastructure. I think that's a common design error that we tend to see. But of course, this also benefits users of adapted cycles. So increasingly, we're seeing quite a lot of people, disabled people, making use of sort of modified electric bikes in particular. These design changes that benefit e-cargo bikes will also make more inclusive active travel too.
I guess larger cycle stands as well to help accommodate the larger size of the e-cargo bikes in comparison to just your standard two-wheeler bikes as well.
Yes, and I think we'd also encourage you to consider e-cargo bike loading bays. So whilst a huge benefit of e-cargo bikes is that you can park up on the pavement right outside and it's legal to do so, as they become more popular, this could potentially add to street clutter, and you might not always park in a place that is most appropriate. So if you can allocate some space for e-cargo bikes as we do for loading bays, of course it can be a much smaller space, so you can squeeze it into more locations. But I think in shared spaces in particular, this is going to be really important.
Thank you. The next question is about safety concerns. Are there any safety concerns around the cargo bike that you have encountered from weight and size? For example, risk to pedestrians in event of collision, or just do operators typically take out motor insurance?
Yes, so all of the riders will have insurance on the vehicles, which covers everything you'd expect it to do. And I think, yeah, it is true that these bikes are expected to be operating much more closely to vulnerable road users such as pedestrians. And you're right, they are larger and heavier than traditional bikes, but I think we have to compare them to the alternatives. So compared to vans, they're of course much safer. And where we can have them operating in dedicated infrastructure, it's going to be an even greater benefit. I think the other thing to consider is the importance of training. It was something that I think we've tried to be really hot on in our trials. And yeah, being taught by the experts, being taught on with training that is specific to the bike, and get those behaviours in nice and early to keep everything safe.
Thank you. The next question is, at what point does an e-cargo bike become an electric van? Is it when it exceeds the cycle design vehicle dimension of 2.8 meter long to 1.2 meter wide?
Yeah, really good question. And I think, yeah, you'll have seen some of the bikes that we're operating almost do resemble minivans. I think the size and weight of e-cargo bikes at the moment is mostly limited by the power of the motor. So they will get so large that they can't get up the big hills anymore, or it becomes inefficient to use on cycle lanes because they simply don't fit. And of course, even with the bikes at their current size, it's not always appropriate to operate bikes on all cycle infrastructure where it would be not particularly courteous to other users of the infrastructure. But yeah, it is bound at the moment by legislation, and also that piece around only having electric assistance when the pedals are turning, and only up to 15.5 miles an hour, and only up to 250 watts of continuous assistance. But as I say, that is also something that's holding back the e-cargo bikes at the moment in terms of their ability to operate in more hilly terrain and to carry larger loads. And we're hoping for a bit more clarity in the UK at least on the legislation around e-scooters and light electric vehicles, because we think that could be a category of vehicle that could really benefit e-cargo bikes, or whatever their next step of evolution might be.
Thank you. Have there been trials of using e-cargo bikes in winter environments?
Yes, so I mean, all of our trials so far have started during the winter months, and I think, yeah, fair to say if it's snowing and there's ice on the ground, it probably isn't going to be safe to use them, but then it might not be safe to be on the roads in a van either. So I think, yeah, they are perhaps more susceptible to the weather, I think it's fair to say, but we're hoping for really promising results during the summer. But then, of course, you look over to the continent. I think of cities like Oulu in Finland, where it doesn't seem to hold people back. So maybe it's a training thing, familiarity thing, confidence. But yeah, we'll just have to see once we get into the data, the impact of weather.
Thank you. We have a lot of questions coming through. We're a bit over time. I hope it's okay to proceed. What is the lifespan of an e-cargo bike?
So an interesting question. I think, yeah, with some of the newer models in particular that haven't gone through the same, years of testing and consumer feedback, they can fare less well than the more established models that have been out there for years. But I think the single biggest factor is, the mechanical sympathy of the riders, should we say. If you're riding them up and down curbs all the time or smashing them over potholes, your bike isn't going to last very long. So yeah, training is, I think, again, the key thing to prevent that, and also having preventative maintenance regimes, so to catch those issues before they become real problems. But yeah, I think you can expect to get a good few years minimum out of your e-cargo bikes, but only time will tell, and everyone has different experiences, I think it's fair to say.
Thank you. Do you have examples in your trials of van drivers retaining as cargo bike riders and swapping the vehicles they use on a daily basis, or were van drivers resistant to this change?
Varies by trial and sort of varies by the individual in question, which I think really shows the the amount we still have to learn about the behavioural change elements. So I think in our BRI trials, it's sort of upwards of 90% of the trips have been replaced, and the rider gets along with it really well, and he loves sort of whipping around in his four-wheeler. But then in other trials, it's been sort of there's been less utilization. I think one person said that they actually felt a little bit embarrassed to be on the e-cargo bike. But of course, these are all problems that will solve themselves as they become more ubiquitous and as they become a more familiar sight on our streets.
Yeah, I think we also found, early on, the riders that we spoke to that were already keen cyclists and perhaps cycled to and from work were more in favour of swapping out the vans for the cargo bikes in their day-to-day job as well.
And perhaps older people less inclined. So there is the sort of physical ability element to consider too, which might not be so relevant when using a van.
Thank you. I will take the last question, and all additional questions will be answered directly by the presenters. What work has been done to prioritize demands to reduce delays for e-cargo bikes at traffic signals?
Cycle priority signals, so letting the cyclists take off a few seconds in advance of the rest of the traffic, where they accelerate less quickly than traffic. I think that's really important for ensuring safety, and also sort of wider policy narrative. You know, we are prioritizing cyclists, and this is how we see people moving in future.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Lawrence and Ellie, for a fantastic presentation, and thank you very much for all of you who have joined us today. We're happy to see you in all our Snacking On webinars coming soon. So thanks again, everyone. Please feel free to follow up with the presenters via the contact details shown on the screen, and have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.